Back here for the final time on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, diving into the last segment of the show. More of an open topic that I wanted to go over with you guys, where the Chargers are kind of heading under new head coach Jim Harbaugh and what this offense could look like in 2024. Before I get into all the points and all the sides that I want to get into, one last time, wanted to remind you guys, if you have any questions, comments during this live show, to use the tip and donations link with any of your questions at GSMCPodcast.net. Again, if you're not watching this episode and only listening to it, the tip and donations link is GSMCPodcast.net. We always show a great appreciation to you guys if you're able to do this with any of your questions. It makes the show more enjoyable, and it's always a big help for the network and all the shows other than this one across this platform. So if you guys are able to do that, we always send a big thank you back to you guys for your donations. And rounding that off now with the final topic of today's show, talking about the Chargers and this whole big discussion about, who was going to leave out of the big four, taking up the most salary on this team. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Khalil Mack, and Joey Bosa. Those were almost taking up half of their salary cap for the Los Angeles Chargers. And they had to meet a deadline, I think, before Friday of last week or Saturday, where they had to get under the salary cap. And we saw Mike Williams be the first to go. He's found a new home. Then, surprisingly, we saw Keenan Allen, the other one to fall for this Los Angeles Chargers team. He was traded away for only a fourth-round pick. I touched on what he said was the reasoning behind that yesterday. And just to recap it a little bit, he was basically the only one out of Bosa and Mack to not agree to a contract restructuring. If that was right or wrong for Keenan Allen to say, no, I don't want to do that, and, help the team out a little bit, that's fine. It's his money, it's his contract, it's his career. He can choose to do that. But where the Chargers stand at this moment, they really didn't have time or really the need to negotiate and, I guess, plea with Keenan Allen to, please lower your salary cap. We don't want to move you. They found a good trade partner with the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears jumped on that opportunity to get one of the premier wide receivers to add to their team for a cheap price in a fourth-round pick. I think it obviously made sense for the Chicago Bears. And now the Chargers, again, on this side of the discussion, deciding between offense and defense, they clearly chose defense, and Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa were more open to restructuring their deals. They agreed to restructure their deal, so they, bought in and trusted this vision that Jim Harbaugh was building for this team. So they were able to stay. And unfortunately for Allen and Mike Williams and Justin Herbert, the offense now, if you really look at it, is really lacking now in terms of talent and skill set. I saw somewhere that Justin Herbert, I think it was either 50 or a lot more in terms of percent of his touchdowns went to Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Gerald Everett also, who signed with the Chicago Bears. All of that target share and success that he had with all those guys are now gone. And you could think that Justin Herbert is now looking around and thinking, where do I stand? Where does my development stand? And all these priorities that seem to be ahead of supporting Justin Herbert. And obviously Jim Harbaugh isn't naive to the fact that he needs to do whatever he can to support Justin Herbert. He's got a franchise quarterback on his team. He's very fortunate to have that because, like we've seen this year, they're very hard to come by, and a lot of teams pay a lot of money and give up a lot of stuff to get a franchise quarterback on their team. So that's not going to be ignored. And I think, fortunately for them, they at least have that number 5 pick to draft a bona fide number 1 receiver. They could get Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze with that pick. And if they don't like it, I think a lot of people will give up a lot of draft capital to move into that spot and draft a quarterback, a J.J. McCarthy, a Drake May, if teams like him over McCarthy. A lot of teams are willing to give up a lot of stuff like we've seen already in this free agency period. So they could do that. But just in this free agency, they did bring in some players, which transitions me into what I wanted to talk about and this, topic. They brought in guys like Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly, and Gus Edwards. And like I mentioned, they lost all the exciting, skilled, vertical threats like Keenan Allen, Williams, Eckler, Jalen Guyton is an unrestricted free agent. I thought he played very well for this Chargers team last year. He's really without a team right now, so they could bring him back. I'm sure Herbert would love that. But you look at the guys that they brought in, two tight ends, really two blocking tight ends, and Gus Edwards, who's a powerful between the tackles sort of runner, and no wide receiver yet for Justin Fields. And what this tells me, what Jim Harbaugh is trying to do with this team, not for sure, but it is looking like he's trying to make this team more of a defensive line, offensive line based team, winning the trenches, winning those nasty battles in between the lines, and not really focusing on vertical offense, five wide sort of style offense that a lot of teams have shifted into. I think he's going the opposite way and trying to establish this team as a defensive first, very gritty, just team that you don't like playing against. Everyone knows those teams. The Steelers are one that a lot of people would characterize as that, of wanting to run the ball, establish a tempo through that. The Raiders are another one that comes to mind with Antonio Pierce and his sort of style. I think he's gearing towards that sort of offense. And, with their offense and prioritizing defense, you could look at it as, it makes sense. You could be on board with that. And if you are on board with it, it would make sense because the Chargers defense was bottom 5 last year in yards allowed per game, allowing 363 yards per game. They also allowed the third most passing yards per game at 250, and they were 21st in the NFL in points per game at 23. So, looking at both sides of the ball, defensively, those numbers and those stats are not going to fly with Jim Harbaugh. It's just not. You saw the kind of team that he had, even back with the 49ers, a great defense to establish that offense. And most recently in Michigan, you saw how great and prolific they were on the defensive side of the ball. They ran the heck out of the ball with Blake Corum, and they threw it when they had to. They weren't bad at throwing it, but their identity was that great offensive line, that great defensive line, and building their momentum, building any sort of success that they had based off of their defense. And last year, with those numbers that I just threw out, they gave up a lot of yards and a lot of points per game, and they were able to manage that a little bit with their offense and having all these great players on it. But now, I think focusing more on defense, they're going to try to assure that. But if you look at it from a different aspect and are trying to play devil's advocate, your offense kept you in a lot of games last year. We saw Justin Herbert give his best Superman impression in a lot of those games, and a lot of times it was the other guys like Quentin Johnson and his supporting cast that really didn't step up for him in some of the big games. The biggest one for me that jumps out is the Green Bay Packers game. Quentin Johnson had a wide open touchdown and he just dropped it. That can't happen. It happens, but he was a first round pick and he was drafted to be a great weapon. You can't have those sort of drops, and he didn't have a great first year. You don't write him off, but that is a low point in that moment, and just a moment that you go like, of course that happens. The Chargers were very unlucky in that aspect and were, I think, the losers of probably the most close games in the NFL last year. So they have to, I think now with Jim Harbaugh, focus on that defensive side of the ball where they do have good players, and I don't think they've gone the most out of those players which is why Jim Harbaugh brought his defensive coordinator from Michigan in to improve that as well. If he comes close to any amount of success that he had with Michigan, I think they're going to be looking good with Derwin James, Bosa, Mack coming back. They have stars on that side of the ball. I'm a big fan of Asante Samuel Jr. I think he's really good. So they have prominent players. It's just a matter of getting the best out of them. And with this decision to keep Bosa and Mack, you have to ask the question of, Bosa's been injured. He hasn't really performed like he has early in his career. Can you guarantee that you can get that out of him? You better hope that you do, because you lost two of your best players on the offensive side of the ball. And with Khalil Mack, he's coming off of probably one of his most definitely impressive season as a player in the NFL. Can he replicate that? Maybe not to the same number and extent that he did. I forget how many sacks he had. I think it was like 17 and a half or close to that. Can he replicate that getting older now in the later stage of his career? Again, you better hope that he does, because offensively, you've really sacrificed that side of the ball to make sure that this defense has pass rushers that are still, you want to think that they're still good and can still produce for you. And this could look bad, obviously, in hindsight, looking into the season and how it all plays out. But, I think Jim Harbaugh took a gamble. He's been put in this position to make these sort of decisions. And most of all, I think he's just being himself. He is that type of coach, a defensive, established first kind of guy, winning the battles between the trenches and doing all that stuff, the fundamentals to being a successful team. He's that kind of coach, so you got to commend him for being himself and not being afraid of being himself for an organization that he was part of and he deeply cares about. I'm sure of that, so he wouldn't be doing this if he didn't fully believe in it. I'm rooting for Jim Harbaugh. I think this was a great hire for the Chargers and one that they needed to bring in a solid voice, a solid leader in Jim Harbaugh. I think it'll do everyone good, as well as make Justin Herbert a bit better. But looking at it right now, in this moment, a lot of people will question what they do on offense. They have options, but right now they haven't been too active in free agency with that salary cap issue that they have. Now they've fixed it a little bit, but, if you're a fan of them, you kind of want to see them get the ball rolling a little bit, make an exciting signing somewhere to complement this offense, because in their division, the Chargers have Devontae Adams. They just signed Alexander Mattison, and it's not breaking news that it's going to change the Raiders into this high, prolific offense, but they've made some moves, added Christian Wilkins as well. The Chiefs are only going to get better, signing Marquise Brown, bringing back Chris Jones. Rashee Rice is up and coming in their wide receiver room. I don't have to mention Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes. Their defense is pretty much the same, so you know what you're going to get out of them. The only teams that haven't done much are the Broncos, who just are sitting in a gray area right now. It doesn't look like they know what they're doing. And the Chargers, unfortunately, they've done moves. They've committed to making some of these tough decisions, but, you expect a little bit more out of them. I'm not saying it's over by any means, but I would like to see them start to do a little bit more with this team and push it in a direction offensively where they sign some players, bring in some talent, some exciting news, because I think they can be good. I've been a big supporter of Justin Herbert in the past. I think he's really, really good, up there with the Joe Burrows and the I'm blanking Josh Allen's, as well as the Lamar Jacksons. I think he's that sort of talent, and I wouldn't want to see him get wasted in the Chargers and not really supporting him like they should have. We're going to see where that ends up. That's where the conversation kind of stands. I would love to know where you guys stand on this topic. Do you think the Chargers made the right decision in going more defensively and establishing that first, hindering their offense a little bit? Or are you full panic mode and expect this team to not be able to score points at all and this thing to sort of blow up next year? Leave your comments down below. Engage with it. I always love to know what you guys think about that and where the Chargers are going in the future. It's going to be one of the more interesting teams to see with Jim Harbaugh coming back to the NFL. I'm looking forward to seeing it, and hopefully it works out for them. And in saying that, that pretty much wraps it up for today's episode on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. As always, please remember to subscribe, like, and follow the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show's content specifically, go check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for YouTube shorts that I always post every weekday. The full recorded live episodes that happen throughout the week and in weeks past, they're all on there for you guys to rewatch or go check them out for the first time. And individual segment videos from each of the live shows. In case you missed one segment or want to go rewatch a certain segment, it's all on there as well. A reminder to always tune in at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time every weekday for more football conversations and stories around the NFL. From me, your host, as always, Manny Maradiaga, thanking you guys for tuning in to today's episode, and I would love to see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to